The scream that tore through Magnolia Springs at 3 in the morning belonged to Serafina Delacroix, and it would haunt the sleepy Alabama town for weeks to come. She stood frozen in the doorway of Evangeline Thorne's apartment, her trembling hand still gripping the spare key. Her best friend lay sprawled across the hardwood floor in a pool of crimson, her blonde hair fanned out like spilled silk. The metallic smell of blood mixed with Evangeline's signature vanilla perfume created a sickening cocktail that made Serafina's stomach lurch. "Evie!" The word came out as barely a whisper. Serafina dropped to her knees beside the body, her white nightgown soaking up the sticky wetness beneath. She pressed her fingers against Evangeline's neck, searching desperately for a pulse that would never come again. Sirens wailed in the distance. Someone must have heard her scream. The reality of the situation crashed over her like a violent wave, and she scrambled backward, her palms leaving bloody prints on the floor. Sheriff Buck Morrison arrived first, his boots heavy on the wooden steps. He took one look at the scene and immediately radioed for backup. "Jesus Christ, Sarah. What happened here?" Serafina couldn't form words. She sat huddled against the wall, staring at her blood-stained hands. Evangeline had called her 2 hours ago, sobbing about something she couldn't discuss over the phone. She'd begged Serafina to come over immediately, said it was a matter of life and death. By the time Serafina had thrown on clothes and driven across town, it was already too late. "I should have come sooner," she finally managed to say. "She called me. She was scared." The sheriff's weathered face softened with concern. He'd known Serafina since she was in pigtails, the daughter of the most respected judge in 3 counties. "What did she say exactly?" "That she'd discovered something terrible. Something about her work at the courthouse." Serafina's voice cracked. "She said people weren't who they seemed to be." Within an hour, Judge Nathaniel Delacroix arrived at the scene, his silver hair disheveled and his usually pristine suit wrinkled. He pulled his daughter into his arms, shielding her from the chaos of crime scene photographers and forensic investigators. "We need to get you home," he murmured against her hair. "This is no place for you." But Serafina pulled away, her green eyes blazing with a determination that surprised them both. "No, Daddy. Someone killed Evie, and they're going to pay for it." The sheriff cleared his throat uncomfortably. "Sarah, honey, you need to let us handle this. Could be a robbery gone wrong. Or maybe she surprised an intruder. Evie's purse is still on the counter. Her jewelry box is untouched." Serafina pointed to the obvious signs that made the sheriff's theory fall apart. This wasn't random. Judge Delacroix placed a firm hand on his daughter's shoulder. "The sheriff knows what he's doing. We don't need to interfere with police business." Something in her father's tone made Serafina study his face more carefully. There was worry there, yes, but also something else. Something that looked almost like fear. 3 days later, after Evangeline's funeral had come and gone, Sheriff Morrison delivered news that made Serafina's blood boil. "We're calling it a burglary. Case closed." "That's impossible." Serafina stood in the sheriff's cramped office, her hands clenched into fists. "Nothing was stolen. She called me because she was in danger. Look, sweetheart, I know you want answers, but sometimes bad things just happen to good people. Evangeline must have walked in on someone looking for drug money or something valuable to pawn." The patronizing tone in his voice made her see red. "Don't you dare call me sweetheart, Buck Morrison. I've known you since I was 5 years old, and you've never given up on a case this easily." Sheriff Morrison shifted uncomfortably in his chair. "Orders are orders, Sarah. The case is closed." "Whose orders?" The silence that followed told her everything she needed to know. Someone with influence had made this problem disappear, and she had a sinking feeling she knew who. That evening, Serafina sat in her childhood bedroom, staring at the business card she'd found tucked inside an old phone book. Dante Blackthorne, private investigator. She'd torn the house apart looking for someone, anyone, who might help her find the truth when the local authorities wouldn't. The man who answered the phone had a voice like gravel and whiskey, rough around the edges, but strangely comforting. "Blackthorne Investigations. I need to hire you." The words tumbled out before she could second-guess herself. "Someone murdered my best friend, and the police are covering it up." A long pause stretched between them. "What makes you think it's a cover-up?" "Because my father is Judge Nathaniel Delacroix, and I think he knows more about this than he's telling me." Another pause, longer this time. When Dante Blackthorne finally spoke again, his voice had changed, becoming softer but somehow more dangerous. I'll be there tomorrow. Dante Blackthorne arrived in Magnolia Springs driving a beat-up black Camaro that had seen better decades. Serafina watched from her bedroom window as he parked across from the courthouse, a tall figure in dark jeans and a leather jacket that had weathered too many storms. She met him at Rosie's Diner, the only place in town where conversations could get lost in the clatter of plates and the hum of locals discussing everything from crop prices to high school football. He slid into the booth across from her, and she immediately understood why women probably threw themselves at him despite the obvious danger he carried like a second skin. Dark hair, darker eyes, and a jawline that belonged in magazines. But it was the careful way he moved, like a predator constantly assessing threats, that made her pulse quicken in ways she didn't want to examine too closely. "You're younger than I expected," he said, studying her with an intensity that made her squirm. "I'm 23, not a child." Serafina lifted her chin defiantly. "And I can pay your fee. This isn't about money." Dante leaned back, his gaze never leaving her face. "Tell me about Evangeline Thorne." For the next hour, Serafina painted a picture of her best friend. Evangeline had worked as a clerk at the courthouse for 2 years, filing papers and managing schedules for various judges. She was popular, outgoing, and had never mentioned being involved with anyone dangerous. She started acting strange about a month ago, Serafina admitted. Jumpy, paranoid. She kept saying she'd seen things at work that didn't add up. What kind of things? Case files that disappeared overnight. Sentences that got reduced without explanation. She thought someone was tampering with records. Dante's expression darkened. Did she mention any names? She was scared to say too much over the phone. That's why she wanted me to come over that night. Serafina's voice caught. I should never have hesitated. Don't. The word came out sharp enough to cut. Guilt won't bring her back, and it won't catch her killer. They drove to Evangeline's apartment building, a modest 2-story complex on the outskirts of town. The landlord, a nervous man named Pete Garrison, let them into the crime scene after Dante slipped him $200. The apartment had been cleaned, but Dante moved through it like he could still see the ghost of violence that had occurred there. He examined the door frame, the windows, the lock that showed no signs of forced entry. She knew her killer, he said finally. Let them in willingly. Serafina hugged herself against a sudden chill. How can you tell? No defensive wounds on her hands from what I saw in the police photos. No signs of a struggle until the very end. She trusted whoever did this. They spent the rest of the afternoon talking to Evangeline's neighbors, most of whom claimed they'd seen nothing unusual that night. But Mrs. Chun from across the hall mentioned a detail that made Dante pause. There was a car parked outside that didn't belong, the elderly woman said in broken English. Black sedan, tinted windows. I see it 3, maybe 4 times last month. You tell the police this? Mrs. Chin shook her head vigorously. Police no ask. They say burglary, case closed. No want to hear more. As they walked back to Dante's car, Serafina felt the weight of being watched. She turned to scan the street, but saw only ordinary small-town life playing out around them. Someone's keeping tabs on us, Dante said quietly, confirming her instincts. How do you know? Blue pickup truck's been following us since we left the diner. Driver thinks he's being subtle. Dante opened her car door with casual efficiency. We're going to take a little detour. Instead of heading back toward town, Dante drove down a series of winding back roads that led into the countryside. The blue pickup maintained its distance, but stayed with them. After 20 minutes of playing cat and mouse, Dante suddenly pulled into an abandoned gas station and killed the engine. Stay in the car. The pickup drove past without stopping, but not before Serafina caught a glimpse of the driver. Her blood ran cold. I know him, she whispered when Dante returned. That's Deputy Carl Weber. He works for Sheriff Morrison. Dante's jaw tightened. How well do you know the sheriff? He's been friends with my father for years. I thought I could trust him. The realization that her own father might be involved in covering up her best friend's murder hit her like a physical blow. What if Daddy really is hiding something? Then we find out what it is. Dante started the engine again. But first, I need you to understand something. If your father is involved in whatever got Evangeline killed, things are going to get dangerous fast. People who cover up murders don't hesitate to make more bodies disappear. Serafina stared at his profile as he drove, noting the way his hands gripped the steering wheel and the tension in his shoulders. You sound like you're speaking from experience. I am. She waited for him to elaborate. but he offered nothing more. The silence stretched between them, filled with unspoken questions and the growing awareness that she was placing her life in the hands of a man she barely knew. As they drove back toward town, Serafina found herself studying Dante's reflection in the passenger window. There was something broken about him, something that called to a part of her she didn't know existed. Her sheltered life had never prepared her for a man like this, someone who moved through darkness like he belonged there. "Why did you agree to take this case?" she asked suddenly. Dante glanced at her, and for just a moment, she saw something vulnerable flicker across his features before the mask slipped back into place. "Because some people deserve justice, even when the system fails them." The break in the case came from an unexpected source. Dante had spent the morning at the courthouse, charming information out of clerks and secretaries while Serafina waited in his car, trying not to think about how her life had turned upside down in less than a week. When he slid back into the driver's seat, his expression was grim. "Your friend was right to be scared. Someone's been systematically altering case files for the past 2 years. Drug charges getting reduced to misdemeanors, evidence mysteriously disappearing from lockup." Serafina felt sick. "My father would never allow that. Maybe he doesn't know, or maybe he's part of it." Dante started the engine. "Either way, we need to talk to him." "Absolutely not." The words came out sharper than she intended. "I won't ambush my own father based on speculation." Dante's dark eyes studied her face. "You hired me to find the truth. Sometimes the truth hurts." They drove in tense silence to the Delacroix family home, a sprawling antebellum mansion that had been in the family for 5 generations. Judge Delacroix was in his study when they arrived, reading legal briefs behind a mahogany desk that cost more than most people made in a year. "Daddy, this is Dante Blackthorne. I hired him to investigate Evie's death." The judge's face went through several expressions before settling on barely controlled anger. "Serafina, we discussed this. The police have already closed the case. The police are wrong." She moved to stand beside Dante, drawing strength from his presence. "Evie discovered something at the courthouse. Something worth killing for." Judge Delacroix set down his papers with deliberate care. "Mr. Blackthorne, I'm sure you're competent at what you do, but this is a family matter. I'd appreciate it if you'd leave us to discuss this privately." "Actually, Judge, I think this concerns me too." Dante's voice carried a dangerous edge, "especially since your courthouse has connections to some very unpleasant people." The color drained from the older man's face. "I don't know what you're implying." "I'm not implying anything. I'm stating facts. The Torino crime family has been laundering money through legal settlements in your district. Cases get fixed, evidence disappears, and dirty money comes out clean." Serafina stared at her father, waiting for him to deny it, to throw Dante out for making such accusations. Instead, Judge Delacroix seemed to age 10 years in the span of a few seconds. "How did you find out about the Torinos?" The admission hit Serafina like a sledgehammer. "Daddy, no. Tell me you're not involved with criminals." "It's not that simple." The judge moved to pour himself 3 fingers of bourbon from a crystal decanter. His hands shook as he lifted the glass. "They approached me 2 years ago with photographs." "What kind of photographs?" Judge Delacroix couldn't meet his daughter's eyes. "Pictures of you, sweetheart. Coming out of your apartment, walking to your car, having lunch with friends. They made it very clear what would happen if I didn't cooperate." Serafina sank into a leather chair, the room spinning around her. "They threatened me to control you? I never thought anyone would get hurt. They just wanted a few cases handled quietly, some evidence to go missing. Small-time drug dealers, nothing violent." The judge's voice cracked. "I swear to you, I never imagined it would escalate to murder." Dante leaned against the desk, his posture deceptively casual. "But Evangeline figured it out, didn't she? She saw the pattern. She came to me 3 weeks ago with questions about case files that didn't match the court records. I told her to drop it, to mind her own business." Tears ran down the judge's cheeks. "I should have found another way to protect you both." Serafina felt her world crumbling. The man she'd looked up to her entire life, the pillar of justice and integrity, had been compromised by thugs who used her as leverage. But worse than the betrayal was the knowledge that her existence had led to Evangeline's death. "The Torinos killed her because of me," she whispered. "No." Dante's voice cut through her spiraling guilt. "They killed her because she threatened their operation. You're not responsible for other people's choices." Judge Delacroix looked up at Dante with something like hope. "Can you stop them? Can you make this right? I can try. But first, I need to know everything. Names, dates, how they contact you, where the money goes. For the next 2 hours, Judge Delacroix laid out the details of his cooperation with the crime family. It painted a picture of systematic corruption that reached into multiple law enforcement agencies. Sheriff Morrison wasn't just covering up Evangeline's murder. He was actively participating in the money laundering scheme. As darkness fell outside, Dante made preparations to leave. I need to make some calls, check with contacts in New Orleans. The Torinos have deep roots there. Serafina walked him to his car, neither of them speaking until they reached the driveway. The night air was thick with humidity and the scent of magnolia blossoms, a deceptively peaceful setting for the chaos consuming her life. I want to go with you tomorrow, she said suddenly. Absolutely not. This isn't a game, Serafina. These people kill without hesitation. They're already after me. At least if I'm with you, I'll know what's happening instead of sitting here waiting for someone to put a bullet in my head. Dante turned to face her fully, and in the dim light from the porch, she could see the internal war playing out across his features. You don't understand what you're asking. Then explain it to me. He was quiet for so long she thought he might not answer. When he finally spoke, his voice was barely above a whisper. The last time I went after the Torinos, they killed my wife and daughter, burned down my house with them inside while I was working late. His hands clenched into fists. I won't be responsible for putting another innocent person in their crosshairs. The raw pain in his voice made her chest tight. Without thinking, she reached out and touched his arm, feeling the tension coiled beneath his jacket. I'm sorry. I didn't know. Now you do. He pulled away from her touch, but not before she felt him tremble. Stay away from me, Serafina. Everyone I care about ends up dead. He drove away without looking back, leaving her standing alone in the driveway with the weight of his confession settling around her like a shroud. But instead of fear, she felt something else entirely, a fierce determination to prove that some people were worth the risk. Serafina spent a sleepless night replaying Dante's words, the pain in his voice when he spoke about his family. By dawn, she'd made a decision that would have horrified her father if he'd known about it. She drove to the Magnolia Motel on the edge of town, where Dante had rented a room that probably hadn't been updated since the Carter administration. She found him in the parking lot, loading equipment into the trunk of his Camaro. I told you to stay away. He didn't look up from the surveillance gear he was organizing. And I told you I wanted to help. Serafina crossed her arms, prepared for a fight. Besides, you need me. You don't know this town or these people like I do. What I need is for you to be somewhere safe while I clean up this mess. There is no safe, Dante. Not until the Torinos are stopped. She moved closer, close enough to see the exhaustion etched around his eyes. You've been carrying this alone for too long. He slammed the trunk shut with more force than necessary. You want to know what happened in New Orleans? What really happened? Yes. I was a detective with the NOPD. Spent 3 years building a case against Vincent Torino and his organization. Wiretaps, surveillance, turned witnesses. I had enough evidence to put him away for life. Dante leaned against the car, his gaze fixed on something she couldn't see. The night before the raid, I got a call from my captain. Case was being transferred to the feds. All my work, handed over to people who didn't know the players. Serafina waited, sensing there was more. I should have seen it coming. Should have known Torino had people inside the department. When I got home that night, my house was already burning. His voice cracked. Maria and Sophie were supposed to be at her mother's house. They came home early because Sophie forgot her favorite doll. The image he painted made her stomach clench. How old was she? 5. She would have been 6 the next month. Dante's hands trembled as he lit a cigarette. I pulled them out of the fire, but it was too late. Maria died in the ambulance. Sophie lasted 2 days in the hospital before her little lungs gave out. Tears ran down Serafina's cheeks. I'm so sorry. The official investigation ruled it an electrical fire. Faulty wiring. Case closed. The bitterness in his voice was palpable. I knew better, but I couldn't prove it. So I quit the force, moved away, started over. Told myself I'd never go after them again. But you're here now. Dante looked at her then, really looked at her, and she saw something shift in his expression. Yeah, I'm here. Because of me? Because some fights are worth having, even when you know they might cost you everything. The weight of his words settled between them, charged with implications neither was ready to address directly. Instead, Serafina focused on the practical matter at hand. So what's the plan? We start with Maxwell Ashford, the district attorney. If your father's telling the truth about being coerced, Ashford has to know about it. Prosecutors don't miss patterns like this unless they're being paid to look the other way. They drove to the DA's office in the county seat, a modern building that stood in stark contrast to the historic courthouse where Serafina's father presided. Ashford agreed to see them immediately, which should have been their first warning sign. Maxwell Ashford was a man in his 50s who'd built his career on high-profile convictions and political ambitions. His office was filled with photographs of him shaking hands with governors, senators, and other powerful figures. "Serafina, I was so sorry to hear about your friend," he said with practiced sympathy. "Such a tragedy when young people get involved with the wrong crowd." "Evangeline wasn't involved with anyone dangerous," Serafina replied. "She was investigating irregularities in court cases." Ashford's smile never wavered, but something cold flickered behind his eyes. "I'm afraid Ms. Thorne had developed some rather paranoid theories about our office. We tried to help her, but she was convinced there was some grand conspiracy." Dante leaned forward in his chair. "What kind of theories?" "Oh, the usual nonsense. Claims that cases were being fixed, evidence was disappearing. The kind of fantasies that develop when someone spends too much time watching crime dramas." Ashford chuckled, but the sound held no warmth. "We have excellent security measures in place. Nothing disappears without proper documentation." "Then you won't mind if we take a look at some of those case files," Dante said. "I'm afraid that's impossible. Attorney-client privilege, you understand. And frankly, Mr. Blackthorne, I'm not sure what authority you have to be conducting any kind of investigation here." The dismissal was clear, but as they prepared to leave, Ashford made a comment that stopped them cold. "Serafina, please give my regards to your father. I hope he's feeling better after his recent health scare." "Health scare?" Serafina turned back. "My father hasn't been sick." "Oh, I must have been mistaken. I thought I heard he'd been experiencing some stress-related issues. The pressures of the bench can be quite overwhelming." Ashford's smile was sharp as a blade. Perhaps he should consider a vacation. Somewhere relaxing, away from all his responsibilities. The threat was barely veiled, and it made Serafina's blood run cold. As they left the building, Dante's expression was grimmer than she'd ever seen it. "He's not just involved," Dante said once they were back in the car. "He's running the whole operation." "How can you be sure?" "Because he knows things he shouldn't know. Your father never mentioned health problems, but Ashford knows he's under pressure. That means they're monitoring him closely, probably have his phones tapped." The implications hit her like a freight train. "If they're watching Daddy, they know we've been investigating. Which means they know exactly where we are and what we're doing." Dante started the engine, his movements sharp with urgency. "We need to get back to your father. Now." They drove through the afternoon traffic in tense silence, both lost in their own thoughts. Serafina found herself stealing glances at Dante's profile, noting the way his jaw clenched whenever he was thinking hard about something. Despite everything he'd told her about his past, despite the danger they were walking into, she felt safer with him than she had anywhere else. The realization should have terrified her. Instead, it felt like coming home. They arrived at the Delacroix mansion to find the front door standing open and Judge Delacroix's car missing from the circular driveway. Dante drew his gun before they even got out of the Camaro, his movements fluid and practiced in a way that reminded Serafina this wasn't his first dangerous situation. "Stay behind me," he ordered, moving toward the house with predatory grace. The foyer was eerily quiet, afternoon sunlight streaming through tall windows to illuminate scattered papers on the marble floor. Serafina recognized her father's handwriting on legal documents that had been torn and thrown about like confetti. "Daddy," her voice echoed in the empty space. They found Judge Delacroix in his study, slumped in his leather chair with blood trickling from a cut above his left eyebrow. He was conscious but dazed, staring at the chaos around him with unfocused eyes. "They took everything," he mumbled as Serafina rushed to his side. "Files, photographs, the recordings I'd been making." "What recordings?" Dante holstered his weapon and began checking the windows for signs of forced entry. "Insurance policy. I've been secretly recording my conversations with Torino's people for months, trying to build evidence." The judge winced as Serafina dabbed at his cut with a tissue. "I hid the master copies in a safety deposit box, but they found my backup drives." Dante spun around, his expression sharp. How did they know where to look? I don't understand. Your backup hiding places. How did they know exactly where you kept things? Dante's voice carried a dangerous edge. Someone told them. The terrible realization dawned on all three of them simultaneously. Judge Delacroix had been feeding information to the Torinos for 2 years, but someone else had been feeding information about the judge. Maxwell Ashford, Serafina breathed. He's not just taking money from them. He's their inside man. More than that. Dante's jaw clenched. I think he's running the whole southeastern operation. Vincent Torino is old-school New Orleans. This kind of systematic courthouse corruption in Alabama requires local knowledge, local connections. Judge Delacroix struggled to sit up straighter. Maxwell's been pushing for me to retire early. Said I seemed stressed, that the job was taking a toll on my health. I thought he was being considerate. He wants your seat, Serafina said. Once you're gone, he can appoint someone completely under his control. The sound of car engines in the driveway made them all freeze. Dante moved to the window and cursed under his breath. 3 black SUVs, tinted windows. Professional operation. He turned to face them both. Is there another way out of here? Judge Delacroix pointed toward the back of the house. Service stairs to the kitchen, then through the gardens to the carriage house. There's an old truck in there that might still run. Go. Both of you. Now. Serafina grabbed her father's arm, but he shook his head. I'm not running anymore. I've spent 2 years living in fear, and it got Evangeline killed. I won't let them hurt anyone else because of my cowardice. Daddy, don't be stupid. They'll kill you. Maybe, but at least I'll die as the man I used to be, not the puppet I've become. Dante stepped between them, his voice urgent. Noble gestures don't stop bullets, Judge. Save the heroics for after we get Serafina somewhere safe. The front door exploded inward with a crash that shook the whole house. Heavy footsteps echoed through the foyer, moving with military precision. Judge Delacroix stood up behind his desk, straightening his tie with hands that barely trembled. Go, he whispered. Both of you, get out of here. Dante grabbed Serafina's hand and pulled her toward the back stairs, but she resisted, tears streaming down her face. I can't leave him. You can and you will. Dante's grip was iron strong. Because if you don't, his sacrifice means nothing. They ran through the kitchen and out the back door as the sound of shouting erupted from the study. Serafina wanted to look back, wanted to help her father, but Dante kept pulling her forward through the extensive gardens toward the old carriage house. The truck was a rusted Ford from the 80s that coughed to life on the third try. As they drove away from the only home she'd ever known, Serafina heard gunshots echoing across the property. He's dead, isn't he? She asked quietly. Dante's hands tightened on the steering wheel. I don't know, but they both knew he was lying. They drove for an hour before stopping at a rundown motel outside the county line. Dante paid cash for a room while Serafina sat in the truck, numb with shock and grief. Everything she'd believed about her life, her family, her father, had been stripped away in the span of a few days. The motel room was exactly what she expected: threadbare carpet, furniture that had seen better decades, and the lingering smell of industrial disinfectant trying to mask less pleasant odors. Dante locked the door behind them and drew the heavy curtains across the single window. We need to assume they're dead, he said without preamble. Your father and anyone else who might have helped us. From now on, we're completely on our own. Serafina sank onto the edge of the bed, her composure finally cracking. I got him killed. If I hadn't hired you, if I hadn't pushed for answers, he'd still be alive. Stop. Dante knelt in front of her, his hands gentle on her shoulders. Your father made his choices. He could have kept playing along, kept being their puppet, but he chose to fight back. That's on him, not you. You don't understand. This is all my fault. Everything. The words came out in a rush, 2 years of suppressed guilt and confusion pouring out. The Torinos only had leverage over my father because of me, because I exist. Serafina, I'm not his biological daughter. The admission hung between them like a detonation. I found out when I was 16, going through old papers for a school project. My birth certificate, my adoption records, everything was there. Dante's expression shifted, becoming more alert. What do you know about your birth parents? Almost nothing. The records were sealed. All I know is that my biological mother died when I was 6 months old, and there was no father listed. Serafina wiped tears from her cheeks. Judge Delacroix and his wife had been trying to have children for years. When the opportunity came to adopt me privately, they jumped at it. Do you know who arranged the adoption? A lawyer in New Orleans. Someone named, she frowned, trying to remember. Vincent something. Italian name. The color drained from Dante's face. Vincent Torino. The pieces clicked into place with horrible clarity. Serafina wasn't just random leverage the Torinos had stumbled across. She was connected to them from birth, part of some long-term plan that had been 23 years in the making. What does it mean? She whispered. Dante stood and began pacing the small room like a caged animal. I don't know yet, but it means you're more important to them than we realized, which makes you infinitely more dangerous to be around. Despite everything, despite the fear and grief and confusion, Serafina felt something else rising in her chest, something that had been building since the moment she first saw Dante in that diner parking lot. I don't care, she said quietly. He stopped pacing. What? I said I don't care. She stood up, moving toward him with purpose. I don't care how dangerous this is. I don't care what it costs. I'm not losing anyone else. Serafina, you need to think about this rationally. I'm done thinking. She reached up and cupped his face in her hands, feeling the rough stubble against her palms. I'm done being afraid. I'm done letting other people make choices for me. You don't know what you're saying. I know exactly what I'm saying. She rose up on her toes, bringing her lips close to his. I'm saying that I trust you. I'm saying that whatever happens next, I want to face it with you. For a moment, Dante stood frozen, his dark eyes searching her face. Then something broke inside him, and he kissed her with a desperation that spoke of years of loneliness and pain. She tasted coffee and cigarettes and something uniquely him, and it was better than anything she'd ever imagined. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Dante rested his forehead against hers. This is a mistake, he whispered. Probably. Serafina smiled through her tears. But it's my mistake to make. Outside, thunder rumbled in the distance, promising a storm that would match the chaos of their lives. But for now, in this shabby motel room with danger closing in around them, they had each other. And sometimes, that was enough to keep the darkness at bay. The storm that had been threatening all evening finally broke at 3 a.m, rain hammering against the motel windows like bullets. Serafina woke to find Dante already dressed, checking his weapon by the dim light of a single lamp. How long have you been awake? She asked, pulling the thin motel sheet around herself. I don't sleep much anymore. He slid the gun into the holster beneath his jacket. We need to move. I've been monitoring police scanners all night. They found your father's body an hour ago. The news hit her like a physical blow, even though she'd known it was coming. Judge Nathaniel Delacroix, pillar of the community, respected jurist, loving father, reduced to another casualty in a war most people didn't even know was being fought. How? Single gunshot to the head, made to look like suicide. Dante's voice was carefully neutral. They left a note confessing to corruption and expressing remorse over Evangeline's death. Serafina closed her eyes, trying to process the magnitude of what they'd lost. No one will believe that. My father would never kill himself. Ashford will sell it to the media. Respected judge, overwhelmed by guilt, takes his own life rather than face the shame of exposure. It's a neat little package that explains away both deaths and closes all the investigations. What about the safety deposit box? The recordings my father made. Already cleaned out. Bank records showed Judge Delacroix accessed it yesterday afternoon, removed all contents. Dante's expression was grim. They're thorough, I'll give them that. Serafina dressed quickly, her movements mechanical as shock numbed her emotions. Everything her father had tried to preserve, every piece of evidence he'd gathered, had been erased as efficiently as if it had never existed. So what now? They've won, haven't they? Not yet. Dante pulled back the curtain slightly, scanning the parking lot through the rain. Your father was smart enough to make copies of copies. He told me yesterday that he had a backup plan, something even Ashford didn't know about. What kind of backup plan? He mentioned a safety deposit box, but not the one they found. A second box, registered under an assumed name. Dante let the curtain fall back into place. Problem is, he never told me where it was or what name he used. Serafina felt a flicker of hope for the first time since learning of her father's death. I might know. When I was little, maybe 7 or 8. He used to tell me bedtime stories about a brave knight named Sir Galahad who fought against evil lords and corrupt sheriffs. Galahad. He always said if he ever had to become someone else, he'd want to be Sir Galahad. Noble, pure, fighting for justice. She managed a sad smile. It was our little secret game. Dante was already moving toward his laptop. Galahad Delacroix would be too obvious. But maybe Galahad combined with your mother's maiden name, or your grandmother's name. Try Galahad Beauregard. That was my adoptive mother's family name. His fingers flew across the keyboard. Accessing banking databases through methods Serafina decided not to examine too closely. After 20 minutes of searching, he found what they were looking for. First National Bank in Mobile. Safety deposit box registered to Galahad Beauregard, opened 6 months ago. Dante closed the laptop. We leave now. We can be there when they open. They drove through the storm-lashed Alabama countryside, taking back roads and changing directions randomly to avoid potential surveillance. Serafina found herself studying Dante's profile in the dashboard lights, memorizing the sharp angle of his jaw and the way his hands gripped the steering wheel. "Tell me about your wife," she said suddenly. Dante's hands tightened. "Why?" "Because I want to understand. What she was like, how you met, what made you fall in love with her." For a long time, she thought he wouldn't answer. Then, so quietly she almost couldn't hear him over the rain, he began to speak. "Maria was a kindergarten teacher. We met when I was investigating a break-in at her school. She was this tiny woman, barely 5 feet tall, but she stood up to me like I was some kind of delinquent student when I tried to question her kids." A ghost of a smile crossed his face. She had this way of making everyone around her feel safe, protected. Sophie got that from her. What was Sophie like? Fearless. She used to climb everything, trees, playground equipment, furniture. Maria would have panic attacks watching her, but Sophie never fell. She had this perfect balance, this confidence that the world wouldn't let her get hurt. His voice cracked slightly. "I used to joke that she'd probably become a circus performer or a mountain climber." Serafina reached over and took his free hand, intertwining their fingers. "They sound wonderful. They were the best parts of me. When they died, everything good about who I was died with them." He glanced at her. "I never thought I'd feel anything like that again. And now I'm terrified that caring about you is going to get you killed too." The confession hung between them as they continued through the storm. Serafina understood that this was as close to a declaration of love as Dante was capable of making, wrapped in fear and self-recrimination, but genuine nonetheless. They reached Mobile as the bank was opening, both of them exhausted and running on caffeine and adrenaline. The safety deposit box was exactly where they'd hoped it would be, and the contents were everything they'd dared to dream. Recordings, photographs, financial documents, and a detailed timeline showing exactly how Maxwell Ashford had been systematically corrupting the judicial system across 3 counties. More importantly, there was evidence linking Ashford directly to Evangeline's murder. "This is it," Dante said, examining a photograph of Ashford meeting with known Torino associates. "This is enough to bring down the whole operation. If we can get it to the right people," Serafina added. "How do we know who we can trust?" "We don't. But I know someone in the FBI who owes me a favor. Agent Sarah Chun, completely clean as far as I know." They were walking back to the car when Serafina spotted the black SUVs surrounding the parking lot. 3 vehicles, just like at her father's house, positioned to cut off all escape routes. Dante. He saw them at the same time, his hand immediately moving toward his weapon. How did they find us so fast? The answer came from behind them as Maxwell Ashford stepped out of the bank, flanked by 2 men in expensive suits who were clearly carrying concealed weapons. "Banking records, Mr. Blackthorne. Amazing what kind of information becomes available when you have the right connections." Ashford's smile was cold and predatory. "Did you really think Judge Delacroix could hide anything from me? I've been monitoring his activities for months." "Let her go, Ashford. Your fight is with me." "Oh, but that's where you're wrong." Ashford moved closer, his attention focused entirely on Serafina. "Miss Delacroix is far more valuable than you realize. You see, her biological mother wasn't just some random woman who died tragically young. Elena Torino was Vincent's daughter, and she was carrying his grandchild when she was killed by a rival family." The revelation hit Serafina like a physical blow. She wasn't just connected to the Torinos by adoption, She was blood family. Vincent has been looking for his granddaughter for 23 years, Ashford continued. When he learned that Judge Delacroix had adopted a baby girl around the right time, he started investigating. It took years to confirm, but when he finally did, he decided the girl was more valuable as leverage than as family. Until now, one of Ashford's men added. Now that the judge is dead and the operation is exposed, Vincent wants his granddaughter back where she belongs. Dante stepped protectively in front of Serafina, his weapon drawn. Over my dead body. That can certainly be arranged, Ashford said pleasantly. Though I'd prefer to avoid unnecessary bloodshed in such a public place. The standoff stretched taut between them, rain continuing to fall and innocent bystanders hurrying past without realizing they were walking through a potential war zone. Serafina could feel Dante's tension like a live wire, knew he was calculating odds and angles, looking for any advantage. What do you want? She asked Ashford directly. Simple. You come with us voluntarily, and Mr. Blackthorne walks away. Continue this pointless resistance, and we kill him here and take you anyway. Serafina looked at the evidence folder in Dante's hand, at the hope it represented for justice and closure. Then she looked at the man who had become everything to her in the span of a few days, who was prepared to die rather than let her be taken. I'll go, she said quietly. No. Dante's voice was absolute. I won't let them take you. And I won't let them kill you. She stepped around him before he could stop her. I'll go with you willingly, but I want your word that Dante walks away unharmed. Ashford nodded. You have my word. Your word means nothing, Dante snarled. The second she's in that car, you'll put a bullet in my head. Perhaps. But this way, she has a chance to live. Continue fighting, and I guarantee you'll both die here and now. The terrible mathematics of the situation were undeniable. Serafina could see it in Dante's eyes as he realized there was no tactical advantage, no clever move that would save them both. For a man who had already lost everything once, the choice was unbearable. Find a way to get that evidence to Agent Chun, Serafina whispered as Ashford's men moved to escort her away. Make sure my father's sacrifice means something. Serafina, wait. She turned back one last time, memorizing his face. I love you, Dante Blackthorne. Don't you dare blame yourself for this. Then she was gone, swept away by men who moved with practiced efficiency toward the waiting SUVs. The last thing she saw before the tinted windows blocked her view was Dante standing alone in the rain, looking like his world had ended for the second time. The warehouse on the outskirts of New Orleans looked abandoned from the outside, but Serafina could hear the hum of generators and air conditioning units as Ashford's men escorted her through a side entrance. The interior had been converted into a surprisingly comfortable office space, complete with expensive furniture and state-of-the-art security equipment. Vincent Torino was not what she had expected. Instead of the stereotypical mob boss from movies, he was a distinguished man in his 70s with silver hair and kind eyes that reminded her disturbingly of her own. He rose from behind an antique desk as she entered, his expression a mixture of wonder and barely contained emotion. Elena's daughter, he said softly, approaching her with the careful movements of someone who feared she might disappear if he moved too quickly. You have her eyes, her bone structure. But your strength, that comes from somewhere else. From Judge Delacroix, Serafina said firmly. My real father. The man who raised me and loved me and died protecting me. Vincent's face darkened. Nathaniel Delacroix stole you from your family. He took advantage of tragedy to claim what wasn't his. He saved me from becoming part of a criminal empire. Serafina kept her voice steady despite the fear coursing through her veins. He gave me a life free from violence and corruption. And yet here you are, surrounded by violence and corruption anyway. Vincent gestured to the armed men positioned around the room. Perhaps it's simply your destiny, granddaughter. The word felt wrong in her mouth when she spoke it. What happened to my mother? Vincent's expression grew pained. Elena was 22, beautiful, full of life. She fell in love with a man I disapproved of, someone from a rival organization. When she became pregnant, I told her she had to choose between him and her family. His voice cracked slightly. She chose him. So you killed them both? No. The denial was fierce, immediate. I would never have harmed my own daughter, no matter how angry I was. It was the Marcello family who murdered them, trying to start a war between our organizations. They succeeded for a while. Serafina studied his face, looking for signs of deception. What she saw instead was genuine grief, the kind of pain that came from decades of regret and self-recrimination. If that's true, why didn't you try to find me sooner? I tried, but the adoption was handled through channels I couldn't access, records that were sealed tighter than government secrets. By the time I had enough influence to break through the legal barriers, you were already settled with the Delacroix family. I decided to watch from a distance, make sure you were safe and happy. Then why start pressuring Judge Delacroix? Why turn him into your puppet? Vincent's expression hardened. Because 2 years ago, someone started targeting my legitimate businesses. Shipments disappeared, contracts were broken, permits were denied. Someone with access to law enforcement resources was systematically trying to destroy everything I'd built. Maxwell Ashford cleared his throat from across the room. Vincent, we should focus on the immediate situation. Mr. Blackthorne is still out there with evidence that could compromise everything. Dante will come for me, Serafina said with absolute certainty. And when he does, you'll regret taking me. I'm counting on it, Ashford replied smoothly. Mr. Blackthorne has become quite the problem. Much better to have him come to us on our terms than to chase him across the countryside. Vincent frowned. I told you I wanted my granddaughter brought here safely, not used as bait for some personal vendetta. With respect, Vincent, your emotional attachment to the girl is clouding your judgment. She's been compromised by her association with Blackthorne. The only way to ensure her loyalty is to eliminate his influence permanently. Serafina saw the power struggle playing out between the two men and realized that Ashford's control over the operation was more extensive than anyone had suspected. Vincent might be the nominal head of the organization, but Ashford was calling the shots. You're going to kill him, she said quietly. I'm going to solve a problem, Ashford corrected. Mr. Blackthorne has been interfering with legitimate business operations. In any other context, that would be considered industrial sabotage. What he's been doing is seeking justice for the murder of his family. Ashford's smile was reptilian. Ancient history. The men responsible for that tragedy are long dead. Mr. Blackthorne's current crusade is purely personal revenge dressed up as righteousness. The conversation was interrupted by the arrival of one of Ashford's lieutenants, a nervous man who whispered urgently in his boss's ear. Ashford's expression grew thunderous. It seems your boyfriend is more resourceful than we anticipated, he said to Serafina. He's managed to contact federal authorities. FBI agents are currently executing search warrants at my office and 3 of our financial processing centers. Vincent looked confused. How is that possible? We have people inside the local FBI office, not inside the New Orleans field office. And apparently Agent Sarah Chun has been conducting her own investigation into judicial corruption for months. Ashford's calm facade was beginning to crack. We need to accelerate our timeline. What timeline? Serafina demanded. Originally, I planned to give you time to adjust to your new circumstances, perhaps develop an appreciation for your heritage. Vincent's voice carried genuine regret. But Maxwell is right. Your association with Blackthorne has made you a liability. You're going to kill me too. No, granddaughter. But we are going to ensure that Dante Blackthorne's rescue attempt fails spectacularly. And then you'll understand that cooperation is your only option for survival. The plan Ashford outlined was sickeningly simple. They would leak Serafina's location to Dante, making it seem like intelligence gathered from a captured associate. When he arrived to rescue her, he would walk into a trap that would leave him dead and her completely dependent on her grandfather's protection. He won't come alone, Serafina warned. Dante's not stupid. I'm counting on that, Ashford replied. The more federal agents who die in the crossfire, the stronger the message we send about interfering with our operations. As the hours passed, Serafina was moved to a different part of the warehouse, a small office with bulletproof windows that offered a clear view of the main entrance. She was given food and water, treated with the careful courtesy reserved for valuable hostages, but left with no illusions about her situation. Night fell over New Orleans like a heavy curtain, and with it came the distant sound of helicopters. Serafina pressed her face to the bulletproof glass, watching as floodlights illuminated the warehouse exterior and amplified voices began issuing surrender demands. Federal agents. This building is surrounded. Come out with your hands visible. Vincent appeared at her side, his face grave. It seems your friend brought more help than we anticipated. Let me go, Serafina pleaded. You can still end this without more bloodshed. I'm afraid it's too late for that. Vincent's voice carried genuine sadness. Maxwell has made certain that the only way out of this situation is through violence. The first shots rang out as Ashford's men opened fire on the federal perimeter. What followed was a sustained gun battle that lit up the night with muzzle flashes and the staccato rhythm of automatic weapons. Serafina could only watch in horror as the warehouse became a war zone. Then she saw him, Dante, moving through the chaos with lethal precision, accompanied by a team of FBI agents in tactical gear. He was heading directly for the building, seemingly oblivious to the bullets whining past him. He's going to get himself killed, she whispered. Vincent nodded grimly. Most likely. Maxwell has positioned snipers at every possible entry point. Even if Mr. Blackthorne reaches the building, he won't make it inside alive. But Vincent had underestimated both Dante's skills and his determination. Using smoke grenades and tactical diversions, the federal team managed to breach the warehouse through a loading dock on the far side of the building. Alarms began blaring throughout the complex as security systems registered the intrusion. Time to go, granddaughter. Vincent took her arm with surprising gentleness. Maxwell has prepared an escape route through the tunnel system beneath the building. I'm not going anywhere with you. You don't have a choice. Stay here, and you'll be caught in the crossfire. Come with me, and you'll live to see another day. The sounds of gunfire were getting closer, accompanied by shouts and the crash of doors being kicked in. Somewhere in the maze of corridors and offices, Dante was fighting his way toward her. Please, Vincent said urgently. I've already lost one daughter to violence. I won't lose another. For a moment, Serafina was torn between the grandfather she was just beginning to know and the man she loved beyond reason. Then she heard Dante's voice over the tactical radio chatter, calm and professional as he directed the federal assault. Target is in the northeast office complex. 2 hostiles down, advancing on the primary objective. I'm staying, she told Vincent firmly. Vincent's face crumpled with disappointment and fear. Then I'm staying too. I won't abandon you again. The office door exploded inward in a shower of splintered wood and twisted metal. Dante rolled through the opening, his weapon trained on Vincent, while Agent Chun and her team secured the room with military efficiency. Step away from her, Dante ordered, his voice deadly calm. Vincent raised his hands, but didn't move. She's my granddaughter, Mr. Blackthorne. My blood. I would never hurt her. Maybe not, but the man running this operation sure would. Dante's gaze shifted to Serafina. Are you hurt? No, but Ashford is planning something. This feels too easy. Agent Chin spoke into her radio. Command, we have the hostage. Repeat, hostage is secure. The response crackled back immediately. Copy that. Be advised, we're detecting elevated heat signatures in the basement level. Possible explosive devices. Vincent went pale. Maxwell wouldn't dare. There are millions of dollars in assets in this building. He would if he thought it was the only way to eliminate all the evidence, Dante said grimly. How do we get out of here? The warehouse shook as the first charges detonated below them, sending tremors through the concrete floor. Emergency lighting flickered on as the main power systems failed, casting everything in an eerie red glow. Tunnel access is through the basement, Vincent said. But if Maxwell is down there with explosives, then we go up. Agent Chin pointed toward a maintenance ladder leading to the roof access. Evac choppers are standing by. They moved as a unit through corridors filled with smoke and falling debris. Behind them, the sound of secondary explosions grew louder as Ashford systematically destroyed decades of carefully accumulated evidence. The roof access was blocked by 2 of Ashford's men, but they were quickly neutralized by Agent Chen's team. As they climbed toward the night sky, Serafina could see the lights of New Orleans spread out below them, a city that had witnessed more than its share of violence and corruption. The helicopter extraction went smoothly, lifting them away from the burning warehouse just as the final charges brought the entire structure down in a controlled demolition. As they flew through the night toward federal facilities, Serafina sat between Dante and her grandfather, torn between relief and sorrow. Vincent Torino would spend the rest of his life in federal prison, but he had saved her life by choosing to stay rather than escape through Ashford's tunnels. Maxwell Ashford's body was found in the basement rubble, apparently killed by his own explosives when the detonation sequence activated prematurely. "It's over," Dante said quietly, taking her hand as the helicopter carried them toward a new beginning. "No," Serafina replied, squeezing his fingers. "It's just starting." 6 months after the warehouse explosion that had ended Maxwell Ashford's criminal empire, Serafina stood in the marble-floored lobby of the New Orleans Federal Building, watching through floor-to-ceiling windows as morning commuters hurried past on Poydras Street. The city had awakened around them with its usual symphony of car horns, streetcar bells, and the distant sound of jazz drifting from the French Quarter. Today marked the final sentencing hearing in the corruption case that had consumed their lives, and despite everything they'd been through, she still felt nervous butterflies in her stomach. "You ready for this?" Dante asked, approaching from the security checkpoint with 2 cups of coffee from the vendor in the lobby. He wore a charcoal gray suit that made his dark eyes look almost black, and she still felt that familiar flutter of attraction whenever she looked at him. "As ready as anyone can be to watch their grandfather get sentenced to life in prison," she replied, accepting the coffee gratefully. The chicory blend had become their morning ritual, a small piece of New Orleans culture they'd adopted as their own. They rode the elevator to the 15th floor in comfortable silence, both lost in their own thoughts about how dramatically their lives had changed. The federal prosecutors had been thorough in dismantling the network of corruption that stretched from Alabama courthouses to New Orleans shipping docks, but today would finally close the book on this chapter of their story. The courtroom was packed with reporters, federal agents, and family members of victims who had been affected by decades of judicial manipulation. Serafina recognized Agent Sarah Chun sitting in the front row, the woman whose investigation had ultimately brought down Ashford's operation. Chun had become something of a mentor to them both, offering guidance as they navigated the complex aftermath of their testimony. Vincent Torino entered the courtroom in federal custody, his once proud bearing diminished by months of imprisonment, but his silver hair still perfectly groomed. When his eyes found Serafina in the gallery, his expression softened with something that looked like pride mixed with profound regret. The proceedings were formal and efficient, the kind of legal ritual that Judge Nathaniel Delacroix would have conducted with dignity and compassion. As the judge read Vincent's sentence, Serafina found herself thinking about the father who had raised her, the man whose posthumous vindication had meant everything to her healing process. "Vincent Anthony Torino, you are hereby sentenced to life imprisonment without the possibility of parole, to be served in a federal correctional facility designated by the Bureau of Prisons." The gavel's sharp crack echoed through the courtroom like a gunshot, final and absolute. Vincent turned to look at Serafina one last time, mouthing words she couldn't quite make out, but understood nonetheless. "I love you, granddaughter." Outside the courthouse, Dante guided her through the crowd of reporters with practiced ease, their questions blending into an incomprehensible buzz of sound. They had learned to navigate media attention during the months of trials, presenting a united front while protecting their privacy. "Miss Delacroix, how do you feel about your grandfather's sentence?" "Mr. Blackthorne, will you continue working with federal investigators? Are the rumors about your engagement true?" They didn't stop to answer, instead climbing into Dante's Camaro and driving away from the chaos toward the quieter neighborhoods upriver. The car had been repaired and repainted after taking bullet damage during their escape from Alabama, but Dante refused to replace it entirely. "Some things are worth fixing instead of throwing away," he told her when she suggested buying something newer and safer. They drove to Audubon Park, where massive oak trees draped in Spanish moss created a canopy over walking paths that wound along the Mississippi River. It had become their refuge during the difficult months of testimony and legal proceedings, a place where they could talk without worrying about surveillance or media intrusion. "How are you feeling?" Dante asked as they walked hand in hand along the river path. "Sad, relieved, grateful, terrified." Serafina laughed at her own contradictions. "Mostly I feel like we can finally start living instead of just surviving." "I know what you mean." Dante stopped walking and turned to face her, his expression serious. "There's something I need to tell you. Agent Chin offered me a position with the Bureau's Organized Crime Task Force. Permanent appointment, full federal benefits, chance to make a real difference." Serafina felt her heart skip a beat. "That's wonderful. You'd be amazing at that." I turned it down. "What? Why?" Because I don't want to spend my life chasing criminals across the country, missing dinners and anniversaries, and all the normal things that make life worth living. Dante reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a small velvet box. I want to build something with you, right here in New Orleans. The ring was perfect in its simplicity, a classic solitaire diamond set in platinum that caught the afternoon sunlight filtering through the oak leaves. It was nothing like the flashy jewelry Vincent might have chosen for his granddaughter, and everything like what Judge Delacroix would have approved of for his daughter. Serafina Delacroix, will you marry a former cop with too much baggage and a tendency to attract trouble? Only if he promises to love me exactly as much as I love him. She held out her left hand, watching as he slipped the ring onto her finger with hands that trembled slightly. That might be impossible, Dante said, pulling her close. I'm pretty sure I love you more than anyone has ever loved anything in the history of the world. We'll call it a tie then. Their kiss was interrupted by the sound of applause from a group of tourists who had been walking behind them on the path. Serafina felt her cheeks burn with embarrassment, but Dante just laughed and took an exaggerated bow, which made her love him even more. That evening, they drove to Magnolia Springs to visit the cemetery where Judge Delacroix and Evangeline Thorne were buried side by side under matching headstones that Serafina had commissioned. She had used some of Vincent's inheritance money to create a memorial garden around their graves, with benches and flowering trees that would provide peace for other visitors. I wish they could have met you, she said, kneeling to place fresh flowers on her father's grave. Daddy would have liked your stubbornness, and Evie would have said you were too handsome for your own good. Think they would have approved of us getting married? I think they would have been happy that we found each other. Serafina stood and brushed dirt from her knees. Daddy always said that love was the only thing that made all the pain in life worthwhile. They stayed until sunset, talking quietly about wedding plans and their future together. Dante had decided to open a private investigation firm specializing in cold cases and missing persons, work that would allow him to help people without the political complications of federal law enforcement. Serafina would use the rest of her inheritance to establish the Evangeline Thorne Foundation, providing legal aid and victim advocacy services throughout the South. As they drove back to New Orleans, Serafina watched the familiar landmarks of her childhood fade into darkness behind them. The small town that had shaped her would always be part of who she was, but her future lay in the vibrant, complicated city that had welcomed them both with open arms. Any regrets? Dante asked as they crossed the Mississippi River on the Crescent City connection. The lights of downtown New Orleans spread out before them like fallen stars. None, she said firmly. Even the painful parts led us to this moment. What about Vincent? Do you regret learning the truth about your family? Serafina considered the question carefully. Her biological grandfather would spend the rest of his life in federal prison, but he had also saved her life by choosing to stay with her instead of escaping through Ashford's tunnels. The money he'd left her would help countless other victims of crime and corruption. I regret the choices he made, but I don't regret knowing who I am. All of it, the good and the bad, made me the person you fell in love with. Smart and beautiful and brave enough to hire a broken-down ex-cop to find the truth. Lucky enough to find a man who was worth saving. Their apartment in the Garden District was a restored Creole cottage with high ceilings, hardwood floors, and French doors that opened onto a courtyard filled with banana trees and flowering vines. It was nothing like the grand mansion where Serafina had grown up, but it felt more like home than anywhere she'd ever lived. That night, they sat on their small balcony overlooking Magazine Street, planning their wedding and their new business ventures while jazz music drifted up from a nearby club. The future stretched out before them, full of possibilities they were only beginning to explore. Some love stories began with fairy tale meetings and perfect circumstances. Theirs had been forged in darkness and danger, tempered by loss and sacrifice. But it was real, and it was theirs, and that made it worth everything they'd endured to find it. In the distance, the bells of St. Louis Cathedral began to chime midnight, their voices joining in harmony across the city that had taught them both that redemption was always possible, even for those who thought they were beyond saving.